Chapter 28, A Small Difference. This Bellwood didn't look too different to how Jen's Bellwood did. There seemed to be almost no difference at first. That was until Jen spotted a yellowed poster on an electrical pole. In bold letters across the top was the word missing. But it was the photo underneath that caught Jen's attention. It was a familiar one. Or at least part of one, anyway. Someone had taken the photo Gwen, Jen, and Grandpa Max had taken at the start of their summer together and cropped it so it was just Jen. The text under the photo confused her even more. Last seen in Slatterville, Nevada. If seen, please call. The phone number was her mother's. The date that followed the location was 6 years ago. That's not good, Jen muttered, glad she'd worn her hoodie instead of her regular green jacket. She pulled her hood up and set off to look around a bit more. It took her a few blocks to remember what had happened during the summer at Slatterville. Tetrax had happened, or to be more specific, Vilgax had set assassins after her to get the Omnitrix, one of which had been Tetrax Shard, a Petrosapian who had ended up quite fond of her. He'd turned on Vilgax and taken out the other assassins. Had that not happened here? There was only one way to find out, but first she headed back to the smoothie shop. "Can you get us back to my universe?" she demanded of Hoakstar, who was in the back working on an old engine-like machine. He frowned, waving a wrench in one hand.
"It'll take quite a bit of time, my dear. Last time I had 3 Galvins helping me fix it. Have some fun and explore. I won't leave without you."
Jen raised an eyebrow. Hoakstar held out a hand.
"But since I know you Tennysons have trust issues, this is the starter key. Take it with you, but if you lose it, we're stuck here for good."
Jen nodded and took the key before she headed out. It took her 20 minutes to bus to the trailer park where Max lived. She just hoped he was there and would have some answers. "What do you mean she is missing?" Rook asked, his voice shaking slightly. It had taken Blukich and Dreba nearly 3 hours to return to the base since they were alone. The fact that they had returned alone was quite the problem, since Jen had been with them when the 3 of them left to go see if they could find the 23rd store.
"We found the 23rd store, and she stepped inside, and the store disappeared,"
Blukich explained. Dreba explained. Blukich frowned.
"It didn't disappear. It faded out of existence."
Rook rolled his eyes at the pair and raised his voice slightly. "The point we have come to is that Jen is missing." Both of them nodded. Rook turned to Max, who was sitting at the computer next to him. The old man was frowning. He glanced up at Rook, then back down at the computer. "Scans aren't finding her. Do we have any idea what the disappearing store might have been? An elaborate trap, maybe?" Max frowned. Max asked, frowning slightly. "I do not know." Rook shook his head. Maxwell Tennyson had been searching for his granddaughter for years. She had vanished from their trip not long after finding the Omnitrix. He had no idea where she was now, even after finding Xylene in a crashed ship in the Arctic and learning how the watch had come to Earth in the first place. Her even getting the Omnitrix had been a mistake, a fluke of chance. It was supposed to go to him. It should have been him. But it had been his granddaughter. The only reason he hadn't been arrested for her disappearance himself was because the government was aware of the Plumbers. He had been a suspect for years. He hadn't seen Gwen, and his children he hadn't seen Gwen since, and his children had never forgiven him. And now there was a new variable on Earth. Vigilantes using illegal alien tech to fight major crimes on Earth. Strangely, they were fighting not only regular crimes, but the underground alien stuff too. and they were less than subtle, but so far neither had been identified. Both were young adults, maybe late teens, a boy and a girl, humanoid, masked, and armed, and well-trained. He shook his head, going over the maps again, and jumped as a hammering sounded on his door. He frowned. No one came to his door anymore. His reputation had been shot to hell when Jen disappeared. "I'm coming. Hold on." He stood from the table and grabbed a blaster out of its place and stepped over to the door. He angled it so his blaster would be out of sight as he opened the door, but the blaster dropped out of his hand. Standing at his door was a very familiar girl in a sage green hoodie. She pulled the hood down and smiled slightly. "Hey, Grandpa Max. I was hoping you'd be able to help me out." Chapter 29, Giving Up. "Jen." His voice was shaking as he stepped backward. "Sort of. It's a little complicated. I'm Jen Tennyson, but I'm not from this universe. Can I come in? It's sort of a long story." Maxwell nodded and stepped aside. Jen came into the RV and held out her arms for a hug. Max hugged his granddaughter for the first time in 6 years. He held on for several minutes before letting go and sitting down at the table, shaking slightly. "You're from another universe?" She nodded, sitting down across from him. "Yeah, ended up here accidentally because of a universe-hopping Mr. Smoothie Shop, believe it or not." "What happened to the me from this universe?" Max shook his head. "I don't know. She disappeared from Slatterville. I have no clue where she is or what happened to her." Jen frowned, looking down at the map on his table. It was built into the table itself, a hollow map of the sector. She flicked a finger across it, frowning. "Does the name Tetrax Shard mean anything to you?" Max blinked, frowning. "Yes." He pulled up a file on the digital display. "Tetrax Shard, one of the last few living Petrosapiens in existence. He's a bounty hunter, or was anyway. He's retired now, lives in a station a few vectors from here. He owns it. Did well for himself during his bounty hunting days. Trained a lot of kids to follow his footsteps, too. Why is this important?" Jen nodded. "Well, when I was in Slatterville all those years ago, it was Tetrax, working for Vilgax, that showed up, along with Claw and 6-6. They were there to take the Omnitrix." Maxwell blinked. "You have it, too?" Jen nodded, holding up her hand. On her wrist rested a watch that looked almost nothing like the clunky black device he'd once seen around his granddaughter's wrist. "Well, I don't think it's the same model she had. I've been through a few upgrades since I was 11, Jen said, running her hand through her hair a bit sheepishly. Maxwell shook his head slightly. "You're gonna have to walk me through this, kid," Maxwell said with a bit of incredulity coloring his voice. "Start with how you even know what the Plumbers are, let alone Tetrax Shard." Jen nodded and began to recount how her life had gone absolutely crazy. Across town, a figure in a suit of carefully made fitted armor swore lightly. A second looked up, frowned from across the room. The taller one stood and stepped over to the shorter one. "You all right?" he asked, pulling two long black hair back with a rubber band. "Yeah," his companion responded. "It's just sparking again." The taller man knelt down to take a look. The armor was open around the girl's leg, but it did not reveal flesh and bone. Instead, there was a mechanical limb where there should have been a real one. From the knee down, the girl's leg was missing. The boy tutted slightly, standing and stepping over to a workbench, picking up a reel of wire. "You hit another growth spurt. The mechanic said the leg would compensate for that, but some of the wires are a bit stretched. I'll need to weld some new ones in real quick, Jay." The girl wrinkled her nose, but kicked her leg up on the work table. The boy pulled a syringe from the toolbox. Don't touch me with that crap. You know it doesn't do shit for me anyway, Kev. Kev shook his head. I had to offer, Jay. Can't be too comfortable without any painkillers. Jay rolled bright green eyes at him. Not the first time I've had work done, you know that. He rolled his eyes and pulled a small, delicate pair of wire cutters from the box before expertly severing a wire with a quick cut. Jay swore loudly. Motherfucker! Warning before you start. Kev laughed and set to work in earnest. He and Jay had been working together since Tetrax had rescued Kevin from a crooked plumber prison. Jay had already been with Tetrax at that time, all of 12 to Kevin's 13, but she had quickly put him in his place when he tried to pull rank. Due to age, she had more experience than he did and was more powerful hands down. She'd beaten the universe's most powerful tyrant at age 10, after all, though she'd lost her leg in the fight. As he worked, welding together wires with metal covered fingers, he spoke. So, what are you going to tell him? He asked it casually, but bright green eyes glared at him. No idea what you're talking about, Kev. He paused in his work. While her limb was on the table, he had a captive audience, which meant that she had to listen to him. They're still looking for you, Jay. He pulled a piece of paper out of the desk in front of him. It was fresh. Across the top in bold print was the word missing. The photo wasn't one of Jay, at least not exactly. According to the poster, it was a computer rendition of what she might look like today, along with her name, a phone number, and the date and place she had disappeared from on Earth. Not a bad likeness, Jay commented. She was right, too. The girl in the photo could have been Jay, if it wasn't for the long scar running from just under Jay's left eye to her chin. The haircuts were different, too. The photo had a rather generic ponytail. Jay's hair was up, but it resembled a photo Kev had once run across in a picture book about Vikings. Parts of her hair were braided with different kinds of beads there from various planets they had visited. She had several pieces of tadenite hidden in it, likely a fortune in small beads, gifted her for jobs well done by their teacher Tetrax. Better than a few of the wanted posters I've seen. You know those aren't exactly valid anymore. Not since Vilgax is gone completely, he said, going back to his work as he spoke. Jay balled up the poster and tossed it across the room towards the trash can. Doesn't mean I don't still have a lot of enemies. They wouldn't be safe. I mean, you've never approached your mom. Kev frowned at the prosthetic in front of him. Jennifer, my mom buried me 2 years ago. She gave up on me. Your family hasn't given up on you. Don't let them give up on you. That silenced her completely. Kev finished his work on her leg in silence.